It's time for Type 40, your Doctor Who podcast from the Spacebook for the Fandom Podcast Network. I'm Dan Hadley, Birmingham's king of the geeks, designated driver, oncoming storm, and master of ceremonies, as always, and here to elevate your day for the next hour and a bit with Doctor Who conversation, fit for that 60th anniversary year on our free-speaking, big-thinking, eclectic show for everyone. Whatever decade or century you started watching, reading, or listening along to those ongoing adventures of our hero, Doctor Who, we talk about it all on this show, and there may even be a few laughs along the way. So come and step into our TARDIS this time. Share this journey together here with us on Type 40. Welcome, yes, welcome back. Make yourselves comfy. Scaro's nastiest, they don't do chairs. I think we can safely say that the only ones they'll offer are bound to come with too many strings attached, pipes, coils, loads of goo, all that kind of thing. So perhaps decline. Yeah, you could be happy standing, won't you? It's all about them on this edition of the show. Sort of. If you've ever had an idle thought about the Doctor's longest standing, most monstrous of foes, odds are you found the answer to it online and on one incredible website. I'm talking about Dalek 6388. It's hitting its 21st birthday later this year, about to come of age. And Simon and I caught up with the originator of the site, John Green, a little while ago for a peek at the code and the blueprints, the history and the future of this extraordinary online resource. That's all coming up in a couple of minutes. First of all, though, I must remind you that if you want to do some real-time traveling of your own, each and every edition of this show, past, present, and future, is just a tap or two away on the device of your choice if you know where to look. There's well over 100 now, reviews, previews, geek outs, and deep dives with all our regular panelists and some pretty awesome guests. In fact, we know there's something for every fan at type40.podbean.com. More on that a little later on, as well as a couple of minutes where we will make contact with that matrix of all knowledge that we call the Fandom Podcast Network for a word about all the other cult conversations going on across that large family of shows over there. There you go. I think that's all you need to know, at least for now. And if you think that's a lot to take in, you may have to empty your mental trash for the wealth of information that's coming when we get together with the Davros of Dalek 6388. He's not going to thank me for that one, is he? Yes, it's hard to imagine a time where we didn't all have these devices, these sophisticated devices of communication about our person all the time, and with them, a whole world of information at our fingertips, stashed in our pockets or our bags on those smartphones, laptops, and tablets. It's funny how every day the touchscreen has become in such a short period of time, and how we all use that term to Google something that we don't know. It's on one hand done irreparable damage to the pub quiz circuit, but on the other, it's enabled and in time earned this sort of sense of legitimacy to the gathering and the offering of masses of geeky information, subjects for the interest of the like-minded across the globe. I think the very first thing that I ever typed into a search engine when I first got online was Doctor Who. And here we are several decades now into the information age, and pop culture devotees are among the most infamously informed and pedantic of hobbyists. You can search practically any little corner of just Doctor Who coverage, be it location hunting, for example, the art of crafting screen-accurate cosplay and fabric matching and all that. It will have that dedicated domain. Sitting tall like the Emperor Dalek is one peerless website. Dalek 6388, a whole online research project about the Daleks themselves, the props as featured on TV in Doctor Who, each and every one, how and who built them, from literally Genesis to Destiny and everywhere else in between. And Simon and I are delighted to be joined by the man who opened it all up in the 20th anniversary month of Dalek 6388 itself. So welcome to Type 40, John Green.
Hello.
Greetings.
Greetings.
It's great to have you here. I've loved using your website for however many years, and I've always wondered about it, the story behind it, and who on earth would have set this ball in motion all those years ago.
Yeah, who was mad enough to do it?
Yeah.
Well, somebody had to be, let's be honest. It needed to be done, and you were the man.
Well, to be fair, I wasn't actually the first person to do it. There were people before doing similar sort of things, but hadn't really obviously the internet was still fairly new in those days, so it never really took off in a big way until it was sort of organized like I did it.
Related and collated. I remember back in the late 90s and the early noughties, there was still a lot of suspicion and scorn, I think, fired in the direction of anyone who would confess that they spent quite a lot of time online on the World Wide Web. We used to hear that expression all the time, didn't we? And it seemed, I think, for a lot of people, because I came to the internet quite late, realistically, and to others, it was something to be suspicious of. And when I'd hear these things talked about in pub chats and things like that, somebody who did spend a lot of time online, or maybe just more time than most, or just knew more about the internet than most, would often say, well, as if to justify their time and their belief in the internet, they'd say, well, it's a great research tool. But a lot of the time in these conversations, that would actually turn the heat up on them a little bit. Because, well, what have you been researching? I say, oh, well, fishing rods between 1945 and 1952. And it just all get worse and worse from there on. But everybody's a geek over something, I believe, John. And in the whole sort of universe, the Whoniverse, there are so many rabbit holes that we can get lost down about even the most minor things. So it's only natural, really, that something as major as the Daleks, Simon, that certainly that we both love, that this would sort of sit at the very top of this now. I mean, ever since Dalek 6388 appeared, site after site after site after site has covered Doctor Who elements to a meticulous degree. But I think that this site is sort of streets ahead conceptually, isn't it?
I think that going back to what I said before, I think there's you only have to look back at things like Andrew Pixley's archives in the Doctor Who magazine to know that there were people doing similar sort of things well before we did. And there was obviously the big coffee table type of books that the older fans will remember, the early years, the Peter Haining books, those sort of things. So there was lots of attempts to do that. But yeah, the site having something online that we can adjust and update consistently, rather than doing it in book form, means that we can constantly keep ahead of the game and update, whereas you don't have to wait a year for a book to come out, which might have things that are wrong with it, and then have to wait another 3 years for another updated version of it. So, from that point of view, yeah.
I think what's interesting is, what you were just touching on there, Dan, is that, back in the sort of the dark days of the beginning of the net, people would literally talk about sort of surfing the net. Nobody talks about surfing the net anymore, because our lives are literally lived now on the net. Whereas before, people would, I can remember saying, what did you do last night? Oh, I just surfed the net for an hour or so. And that's what people do. But then they would leave it and it'd be gone, and they'd move on to back to real life. But now we are never separated from the net. The net is now part of real life, and especially, this is my mobile phone. I'm one of the last people in the world who doesn't have a smartphone, and I don't want one because I don't want to be connected to the net 24/7. And so I'm deliberately, fighting against having a smartphone. And so I think there was definitely a shift from kind of surfing the net, which was literally just skimming over the surface of looking at a few websites and just disappearing down just very shallowly down a rabbit hole and then coming back out of it. And now, because we now live within the net almost, I think sites like Dalek 6388 have just tapped into that, because now you're right, Dan, you can now literally disappear down a rabbit hole with that kind of stuff. You can go a lot deeper than you would have done when you just surfed the net and all you wanted was a little bit of interest about, didn't know Terry Nation had created the Daleks kind of thing. That was as deep as it would have gone.
Yeah.
Now we want to know, we've all got the time and the inclination and the enthusiasm to want to disappear down those rabbit holes and spend an entire evening just looking into, I don't know, rivets on the side of a Dalek, for example, which we didn't do before. And I think that's
things that have fascinated us, and data that's eluded us sometimes. I think, John, since childhood, in many cases. And here you are able to bring it to so many people. But I was wondering, how did the site come into being? Was it a rainy Sunday afternoon project for you, or had you mulled over it for some time, for an extended period of time before you launched it?
A little bit of both, actually, really. I was actually saving up to buy one of the This Planet Earth replica Daleks.
Yeah.
And so if I was going to spend a huge amount of money, I wanted to get the right one. I wanted to make sure that I got the one that was my favourite, the favourite colour, that sort of thing. And so I did a sort of dabbled about on days looking at old Doctor Who magazines and old books that I sort of had in my cupboard, and one day I think it was in a Doctor Who Summer Special magazine. There was an article in there that suggested, it was a very brief version of, very similar to what we've done, a history of the Dalek props, but a sort of 2-page thing, and it suggested on there that there were Daleks that were reused in episodes. And that was like a real eye opener to me. I'd assumed the BBC had made new Dalek props for every story.
Yeah, I think we all did. Yeah.
Yeah, and it just sort of that's sort of fascinated me, and that was the little switch that made me think, no, I need to look into that a little bit more. I'd never realised that, and so I did. I started digging out magazines and books, and sort of very basically trying to piece it together, how it happened, and that's where the site really came from. There were other people online who had attempted to do things like this in the past. I don't know if you remember the fanzine called The Frame.
Really well.
90s,
but Tony Clark and Stephen James Walker, I think, had tried to do something similar in that. There was also the Project Dalek Forum, an early version of that, which I think was the Dalek Builders Guild.
Too.
Various members of that, including Mark Dando, had attempted to do it, and there were very brief things online. So I just thought one day, well, why don't I write something up and make just a dedicated site to it, and that's sort of where it came from.
Because it's a very different mission to embark on, isn't it? To do this, rather than to look at the fiction of Doctor Who, which I think we've all got whilst we all watch the same episodes, we have a sort of very subjective response to it, I think. And head canon, we often stitch these stories together so they can make some sort of sense. Doctor Who making sense? Who needs that? But we do that. Whereas this, what you're dealing with, are the history of these props. It's objective fact, what was built when, the practicalities of what may have been used again or not, or adapted for further use. It's a whole different ballgame, isn't it? And you would think, I always imagined that it'd be quite simple. I never thought that they built new Daleks every time, but I thought it was just a case of put a tarpaulin over them, put them in a cupboard for a couple of years, and everything would be fine. But it wasn't at all like that, was it, John?
Not at all. No. It's quite incredible just how long some of these parts lasted, and how often they were revamped, renewed. Some of them just got very, very long stories you could tell. Particularly the prop you can see on the left on the screen now, which we call Dalek 17, where we're going to have a dedicated video specifically to that prop at some point.
And you know them all by sight as well. That's
Exactly,
incredible.
I think that's just wonderful that you can immediately say, immediately that's Dalek 17. And certainly, I've got into this sort of numbering system that you use on Dalek 6388 because, I think it's a fantastic way of using. For anybody that doesn't know what we're talking about, you need to go and look at the website. But the idea being, if I'm right, John, that you're numbering it from the sort of shoulder section and the base section, and where they've been swapped around. So in effect, what you're saying there on the left is you've got one Dalek that forms the top half and another Dalek that forms the bottom half.
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's just fascinating. I remember when I first stumbled across your website, which is a few years ago now, and I can't remember quite how I seem to remember seeing something on maybe Facebook or something like that mentioned it. It intrigued me, obviously, as a Doctor Who fan. I remember just going and having a look, and I expected it to be I don't know, something fairly cursory, that I could just sort of skim the surface and, oh, right, okay, that's interesting. And I can still remember just reading the first page of the history of the Dalek props, because again, for anybody that doesn't know what this website is that we're talking about, if you're a Doctor Who fan, you just have to go and find it because it's this incredible history of the Dalek props. So I remember reading down this first page thinking, oh, that's all very interesting. And then I got to the bottom and I'm like, page 2 of how I was like, oh my life. Suddenly from that, it just went, and I am going to be here for a long time. And again, because I think as Doctor Who fans, I think it's probably fair to say a large proportion of Doctor Who fans are obsessives. I don't know why we are, but we are. I don't know where that comes from. Somebody needs to write a book on why Doctor Who fans are obsessives, but we are.
They'll dissect us all in the future.
Yeah, and so as soon as I discovered this website of yours, it wasn't a case that I could just dip in and think, oh, that's interesting, I'll come back to that another day. No. Once I found it, that was it. And I remember each evening for I don't know how long, just going through every single page and reading them all. So I've read every last word on your website because it is just so incredibly detailed, and my brain was just fizzing with the information because, like you just assume that there's probably a fairly simplistic history to these props. I certainly never anticipated sort of swapping of shoulder sections and head domes and base set. I didn't think that was all going to be
mind-blowing.
So it literally is mind-blowing to suddenly have all this stuff presented to you.
Is this a story you hear a lot, John? Do people come to you with this anecdote a lot?
Yeah, very, very, very similar. A lot of people sort of. I'm really pleased to hear that, and that makes me very proud to know you've reacted to it like that. But yeah, a lot of people do say very, very similar things. That they've started off and just got stuck in it and didn't realize that they would find it interesting.
So when you launched it, I mean, what were your initial ideas? Was it for a set number of pages and you gave yourself a set period of time to put it together? When did it launch, and how soon after did you start to think, oh, this could really snowball, this could really expand?
Well, it started. I put it up and it was hosted on the family business website. It was sort of tucked away as a page, and it was back in the days where you needed those really long domain names, and it was sort of tacked onto the end of the business website address, and so it was sort of very sort of tucked away then, and there was a page for each Dalek story at the time, and once it was up, I don't know, I made sort of minor attempts to sort of push it. There aren't the ways now that you could do now. There's Facebook now and Twitter. That didn't exist all back then. There was the Recarts Doctor Who on I forget the name of what it was called. Was it Usenet that they used to call it?
Yeah, something called
those boards.
Yeah,
message boards.
That's the sort of thing. I used to push it on there. But it didn't really get much further for a couple of years. And in fact, I got to the point around about 2004 where I nearly took it down because I didn't really think that it was making any ground, that people were that interested in it. And then I got an email out of the blue from my current co-writer, which is the point where it really took off. That's where
So people
really
found it slowly. It wasn't an overnight success.
Not at all. Not at all. No.
I mean, did you have a kind of moment, as I say, I've just talked there about the moment that I realised it was a much bigger website than I at first thought. Did you have a similar moment where you kind of thought, wow, this is a much bigger project than I first thought? Or was it a case that you only looked back in years later and thought, wow, actually, that did take longer than I anticipated. That was more detail than expected. Or did you just suddenly have that moment where you thought, wow, actually, this is a lot more complicated than the story.
It was exactly the point that Gav came along,
right?
Where, I realised that what I'd done was very, very basic.
Right.
It's nowhere near what it is now. I'd done very minimal research into it. It was literally almost just trying to list how many props were in each story.
And this is Gavin Rymel. And so
yes.
was it that Gavin came along with extra information, or so? What made you realise that actually project?
Well, he emailed me out of the blue and he asked a number of questions about Dalek 1-7 as we now know it, which we didn't obviously know then, but specifically in the 5 Doctors, which is why this picture that you showed earlier on resonates quite a lot with me, because that was the point, the period, and one of the pictures that sparked everything off as it is today. But he asked a number of questions I couldn't answer, and I felt they were too geeky for me to answer. I thought, no, this is too much. I don't know the answers to this, and I don't know if I want to know the answers to this. So I tried to bat him away and say, no, you'll have to go somewhere else to find this information, because I don't know it. It was something along the lines of the amount of slats that were around the shoulders.
Right.
Why were there less or fewer, I should say? Why were there fewer slats on the shoulders than other Daleks? And I couldn't answer that at the time. So, but he wouldn't say no. I wouldn't accept no for an answer. So we got together and we said, okay, we'll work out why this prop has got fewer slats than all the others. And that was the point where we did realize where this was going to take a long time to do it. Start at point A and get to Z and take the props one by one and work them all through their history.
And so when you started working with Gav, I mean, I would imagine that this is something that you would do very much here and there. It was just to tweak it here and there, and to adjust things, and to, as you say, to keep updating it and refreshing it. How soon after that point was it that people began to really notice, and for the fan base to decide that it was a place that we should all bookmark?
Well, it took us a couple of years of working all sorts of odd hours when we would message each other on Microsoft Messenger, I think it was back then, and just email each other pictures and things. And it took a couple of years to get to the point where we put the site up, and it was basically relaunched into something that was far more comprehensive than it ever was.
Did you kind of panic at all into thinking, wow, have we just taken on too big a project here? Do we, was there a moment where you just thought, no, I'm just going to just stop this, it's silly? Or were you really into it and so really wanted to see it through to its conclusion?
There are always times, even times like that now, where you think this is too much. We need to stop. But the trouble is, it's got like a giant jigsaw puzzle now that you really want to finish, and I think it never finishes. That's the trouble. We always dig up something new. There's always something new to find out, something new to dig up, something new to add into the history of one of the props, and so it just keeps on going.
I would imagine
to sort of stop now and say, right, that's it. I'm just stopping now. I'm not looking for any more Daleks back or are you still just picking away at that?
No, every single day. Every single day I do something.
I would imagine, John, that just as Gav responded in the way that he did and got in touch, there were probably an army of Gavs out there willing to come forward with not just similar questions, but maybe with alternative bits of information that may not have corresponded with what you thought you knew initially. And you think, well, this doesn't fit, this doesn't work. But in time, it opens a door on an entire new chapter to the story of one or more of the props. And then there's the people who worked on the show. I would imagine you've heard from plenty of them too, or you've reached out to them too for their input, or for them to correct information, things that you thought you knew that you got nailed down. It's been a collaborative thing, hasn't it?
It has. It's very much so. We've had lots and lots of people help us out over the years, and but particularly on that early version of our revamped site, there were still errors on it, and there was a chap called Simon Ayres who was on the Project Dalek forum who did a lot of work into the original 4 props, and he'd worked out something that we'd made a mistake on. So we incorporated his work into it, and all of a sudden that opened up another avenue to go down, and we relaunched again several years later after. But yes, we've had lots of help from all sorts of people.
You have to kind of wonder why as Doctor Who fans are we so? Why does it matter which of those props were from the original ones? Why does it matter whether a shoulder section has been swapped onto a different? I don't know why it matters. I don't know why it's so important. I don't know why I am interested in that kind of stuff. And I think I am, as I say, fairly representative of a lot of Doctor Who fans who really genuinely are interested in that stuff. And so it's not that I am interested in it because you presented me with the facts and I've suddenly thought, oh, that's interesting. No, it's actually the fact that because you presented me with the facts, I've suddenly realized, wow, yeah, of course I'm interested. I want to know more about that. And the more, again, that we as users of the website sort of dip into it, the more we want to dig a little bit deeper and find out, because it is odd. I certainly, you say you're looking at all this stuff every day, and I certainly never get to the point where I think, okay, right, I've heard enough Dalek facts. Really, I don't need to know anymore. Because I was recently watching your most recent video, which is the one about the chase and the crossover of the movie Daleks into the chase. And as I say, when you kind of think you either know everything there is to know about Daleks or everything that you need to know about Daleks, it's not true. I watched that, and again, it was just fascinating to find out, and the fact that you can identify Daleks just by the tiniest little mark might be above one blue ball or one
some tape residue on that slat. That means that the piece of gaffer tape that we saw in another picture was attached to that Dalek. Whoa.
And that there's a rivet that's just off center here, so that allows us to identify. It's just mind-blowingly fascinating. And as I say, you would think, well, come on, really, is that important? Is it interesting? But to Doctor Who fans, I think it genuinely is. To most Doctor Who fans,
I think it attaches to that thing. We like going to the exhibitions and seeing the props. These things are very important to the fans. When they see the real props in front of them, it's sort of, because I've done it. I've had one of the Daleks, the original Daleks, in front of me, and you sort of don't know whether you should touch it or not. It's sort of they take on this slightly different aura. Yeah, that's it. And I think that's why it works, because it taps into that sort of mindset of thinking these things are very important.
It is odd, though, because I mean the photograph that we're looking at the moment, I think if I'm right with my memory, the one on the left there, I can see that the shoulder section is not sitting quite right on the skirt section below, and so that's the one where the collar has just become bent on that front point there, and so you're left kind of thinking, and so all the stuff that you've put out there, it's seeped in. I've clocked all this stuff, and I can now look at that, and I can immediately see from the photo something that I would never have noticed before, which is that the collar section is bent, and you do have to kind of think it's odd, isn't it, that on the one hand, we love Doctor Who because, as Dan, you were saying, we want to understand the fiction of it, and we like to get tied up in the reality of the fiction, what is canon, etc. And yet, on the other hand, we just love that television process as well, of the actual production of making it, that we want to understand. Why is it that collar section is creased? Oh, well, it's because it got put on the Dalek slightly incorrectly, and it's now forever creased. But that allows you then to identify. It is literally, it's a matrix, isn't it? It just opens up so many different directions.
That's right. It just is another piece in the puzzle, and when that piece slots in, and it opens up another little element, another area, you get all excited again about being able to fill in other little gaps, and it goes on like that.
It is bizarre though, isn't it? Because other people would look at us and think, what on earth does it really matter?
I've had this for decades. I would imagine that the both of you have too, where people they hear you're into Doctor Who, and you start talking about it for a few minutes, and they go, they see the fascination on your face and the sort of childhood wonder that's still in your eyes when you talk about it. And now and again, people touch your forearm and say, this isn't real, don't you? and what they don't really realise is, and I always say this is, of course I know it's not real, and that's another reason why it's so fascinating. It's how it came to be made, all these practicalities.
Yeah. Well, also, I just get so frustrated. One thing I will not tolerate is when people say it's only a TV program. No, it's really not. To us, it is not only a TV program. That just couldn't be further from the truth. That's why we feel so passionately about it. Why we're interested in knowing about how many rivets there are.
Yeah, and everyone's got a passion. There'll be people who are out there who, like me, are into football. Liverpool. I'm very into Liverpool Football Club, and there'll be people out there who'll know every result for the last 60 or 70 years or whatever, and every player that's played, and that's great. I think that's brilliant that they can do that, and it's having that interest in something to that degree, whatever it is, I think is amazing, really. And this Dalek thing just happens to be my little thing. But
what is it about Daleks particularly? Why Daleks? Why not TARDISes, for example?
Well, I still get it with that as well. We've seen the little videos that we've done on the TARDIS as well. There are just certain elements of the program where the design just seems to take on a life of its own. I mean,
there is a magic about them, isn't there? Right the way from their first appearance to the last.
Yeah.
And you could say, sometimes they look shoddier than others, and you can say what you like about colour schemes and various other things. But the silhouette of the Dalek remains, the aura of the Dalek remains, and that's why it works. Yeah,
I think it is. We can all become sort of complacent to Daleks because they are so familiar, not only to our psyche but to the psyche of the entire British public, probably, and also to a lot of the world public. And I think there is you can actually take it for granted. We can become complacent to Dalek, but when you boil it down, they are really an incredibly iconic design that, as I say, we actually sometimes forget because we're now so familiar with them. But really, Ray Cusick was an absolute genius to come up with them. They I often think, why is it that they've endured in the way that other things, not just in Doctor Who but in anything, haven't endured? And it's the same as, for example, the classic Coca-Cola bottle. It just is. It's lightning in a bottle, isn't it? It's just an incredibly iconic design.
That's right. It just seems to work, and I think if you took any other science fiction sort of element out of a program from the 60s, say something out of Star Trek from the original series, and put it on the screen in a current Star Trek series, people would laugh at it a little bit and say that doesn't look right.
Yeah.
But the Dalek does still look right. It still works. It still fascinates kids now. They still get excited by them. And
yet it's odd because when you look at them, it just shouldn't work. It's just a bizarre design. The balls at the bottom, the slats at the top. It's just an odd, as has often been made fun of, the sink plunger and the egg whisk. It shouldn't work, and yet, so why is it that it does work? I remember being fascinated as a child. It was something that didn't really occur to me until I was an adult. But and this is going to sound just the most geeky thing probably I've ever said in my life. But I remember just loving the way the light falls on the panels of the skirt, and as the Dalek will move in the studio, the light will just shift on those panels and change subtly. And there's something to me just enormously pleasing about just the way the light falls on those slats. Is something very elegant and aesthetically pleasing about that. So I still try to work out what it is about the. I mean, you can see it just purely from this, this little walking diagram behind me. The way the light falls. Ray Cusick was just a genius to understand how that they would work so well in a studio.
Yeah, I've got a very similar experience to that. Actually, there's a picture from Genesis of the Daleks that I always used to look at when I was very, very young. It was in a book. I can't remember which book it was now. Probably one of the Target making of books, possibly something like that. And I just used to stare at this picture, and it was all because of the skirt section. I was very similar, fascinated by that. How it looked. It was bizarre, but there's also this very non-human aspect to it. Particularly in the early days, people didn't realize how they worked, which I think helped.
Yeah.
It's very obvious now. Obviously, we know now, but early on,
it's obvious, but it seemed unlikely as well that grown men or women that an adult would do that.
Well, and also, I mean, we were talking about this only a few days ago about the Queen's Jubilee parade, which they've got there, and I genuinely just assumed that they were little people inside peddling them like crazy, thinking, how were they managing this? And I now discover, actually, from what I understand, those were remote control. So even today, I think there still is an awe of mystery. I still can't quite visualize Cy Town or John Scott Martin in there, peddling their feet away. To me, the design transcends that. And so, whereas you look at, I don't know, a glove puppet, and it's obvious that there's a hand inside, it still isn't hugely obvious how these things move. They still have a degree of mystery, I think.
Yeah, I think having the dome rotating independently of the movement helps, because it falls you into thinking there, well, there can't possibly be somebody inside moving a stick separately to their feet, and it helps with the illusion.
And again,
a lot of the focus goes on the voice. Obviously, Big Finish makes several Dalek stories a year where we can't see them. All we have is the voice, and the voice does work independently, but so do the visuals too. A silent Dalek, I feel, is just as scary, probably even scarier, Simon, than a noisy, erratic one.
Yeah. And again, it just feeds into the psyche, certainly of me as a child. I just remember being terrified by the Daleks. And again, you go back to some of the original Ray Cusick designs before he finalized that one, and you look at them, and to me, it's obvious that they would not have been the success they are if they'd gone for one of those earlier designs. You look at some, and they just look so cod sci-fi. It just wouldn't have worked. They would have looked exactly like something from Star Trek, for example, to use your comment there, John. And so it wouldn't have worked. And so finally, somehow, something just clicked, and suddenly they worked. And you look at those the early conceptual sketches that Ray did, and even some of the designs with the sort of, they've got weird sort of diamond shaped skirt sections, the really strange stuff. And they're equally interesting, but they just wouldn't have worked in the same way.
They seem like hangovers from the 50s somehow, like they're influenced by something somewhere.
Whereas these look completely timeless. I mean, I don't think for one second, and maybe that's the enduring success of the Daleks, is they don't look like they're from the 60s. They don't look dated. I don't think.
No, I think that's why it works. Is when the show came back in 2005, and the Dalek they used was essentially the same as it was in the classic series, it still looked right. It just it didn't look like it should be from a 60s show. It looked like something that could have been designed specifically for the 2000s.
A fortnight ago, yeah, it was a very, how can I put this, clear moment that Ray Cusick's design had been was lightning in the bottle, that it would be almost impossible to replicate, to try and come out up with something better. Seems like a heresy, but that there was life in these creatures, yet they still had the power to chill again by exactly the same measure, whether they're silent or screeching or whatever else. That does lead me on to my next question, really, John, because it's all very well documenting something that was finite. You said it was already, the corners to it would open up to you all the time, where you think, we thought we knew this, we find out something else. There was a mystery inside, a conundrum, and all these various things. But I suppose that when you embarked on the project, at least you knew there was a sort of a full story. You had that parameter between 63 and 88. There may always be other depth to it, but the range was limited. You know what you were looking at. But then they went and brought the show back. Did that initially frustrate or excite you? And how has that changed the project in the time in between?
Yeah, the initial reaction, I think, was a little bit. The shoulders dropped a bit, and we thought, "Oh no, we're going to have to."
Thought so.
We're going to have to do this again. But then once we sort of got over that and we decided we were going to do it, we realized, well, we're at a good point. If we're going to do this again, we're at the start. We're at the beginning. So there's so much more available to us right now, particularly just talking about the quality of the images that we would have. That it should be more straightforward to do it now.
To document as you're going along, rather than trying to do it after the fact.
Yes, so it should be easier. As it's turned out, it's not. That hasn't always been the case. The props are made so well now, and there's so many more of them that it's very, very hard to keep track of them. And then they get put out to exhibitions and repainted, and it's years ago that didn't. Although they did get repainted, the refurbishments to it weren't always perfect, and so you were able to keep on top of it. But now it's done in such a much better way, for high definition and ultra high definition and stuff like that. That it's
more perfect.
Very much harder. Yeah, it's very hard to keep track of them now. There are ways of still telling them apart, and I've got big charts on my PC at work, which literally are charts of the same props through all the different episodes with things pointed out on them, so we don't forget what bits to look for. But even then, there are still things that crop up that throw you. There's outside the new exhibition, the Worlds of Wonder exhibition that's just begun in Liverpool.
Oh, in Liverpool, yeah.
There's a prop outside the exhibition, and I just can't work out what it is. It's this 2 or 3 weeks I've been working on it, and I cannot get it, and it's driving me loopy at the moment. But I know that it will come eventually. I will get it eventually.
Is it a case that you don't even know whether it's a screen used prop or whether it's a home build or what it is?
Yeah, the ID tag under its eye is something I've never seen before, and the position of the slats, all that sort of thing, doesn't match any of the ones that I know about. So,
well, seeing as you have this notoriety, shall we say, within Doctor Who fandom, most people have seen the site, know what it is, have heard of it, admired it. Even if they're not total sort of Dalek obsessives, it's acknowledged. You must have people who are sensitive to the information that you are probably going to need to want for the site, either working on the show or people like Andrew Pixley, people who are long established researchers who have contacts. Are you able to harvest information from them?
Yeah, to a certain degree. Richard Bignall has been one of our biggest supporters in the last few years. Richard contributes so much to the Doctor Who world, and he's been great with us. Anything we've asked for, he's let us see and use, and he's been brilliant.
Do you think that the website is only really possible now in the digital age, in the Google age? Do you think it would have been a lot harder to do something like this back in the day? You know, when we were talking earlier about just surfing the net, is it something that really relies now on the enormous wealth of information that's out there? Has that helped you? Has that made a difference to the research?
Definitely. It's so much easier to get in contact with people these days, and search for things. That it has opened up lots of different avenues for me to be able to work on it, but you still get the brick walls from time to time. Chris Chibnall, I have to admit, love him or hate him, the one thing he's managed to do is cut down on spoilers, but to the degree that's made things almost impossible to find out anything from behind the scenes. And so his episodes particularly have been really, really hard to do, because it's very hard to get any information from them.
Well, possibly it's also because I don't know, but the show isn't as well documented these days as maybe it was during those early 2005, 6, 7, 8, 9 years when there was Doctor Who Confidential and there was a lot going on in the magazine. There seemed a huge explosion of information then, and maybe the furore and the excitement around Doctor Who generally has just diminished from those mid 2000s, and so has that made a difference as well?
It's just little things that they won't even, you can't even find out who the designers of certain things are.
Okay.
That's what's really holding up the very latest page, which is would be the Eve of the Daleks page, isn't on the site yet, because although I know which props were in it, I've worked out which props were in it, there isn't the extra information of who designed the new gun, that sort of thing, filming dates, all this sort of stuff that you normally sort of take for granted it's going to be fairly easy to find is very, very hard to find now.
And do you find that your heart, as it were, is still in it? Do you love the current show as much as the classic, to the extent that you still want to just keep running on this, or are there points where you kind of think, oh, this is just not working for me anymore, and I'm not interested in it anymore? Has there been any periods of that, since 2005, where you kind of just
crisis of faith?
Yes, there are definitely. The new series doesn't obviously have the nostalgia that the original series did, and I think that taps back into the props thing we were talking about earlier about original props and things. These things take on a life of their own, but I think the new series props will get that eventually. And probably in 10 years' time, we'll be looking back at, say, the very original bronze Dalek, as in the same terms as one of the very first four Shawcraft Daleks.
As a design classic, as a relic in itself.
And the truth of it is, there are people out there who are almost undoubtedly doing that now, because if they were looking at that back in 2005 when they were, I don't know, 6 or 7, and they're now kind of 20, early 20s, and they're almost certainly looking back on that with the kind of nostalgia that we would have looked back on, whatever it was, Planet of the Daleks, Death to the Daleks. And
you were just saying about how television, how the show's made now, the nature of how this show is put together in the 21st century is the same with all TV shows. Everything is a lot slicker, a lot more organized, and more, I suppose, for want of a better term, more corporate. Whereas when you think about the Shawcraft, and you used to mention Cy Town, John Scott Martin, all these people, there's a kind of Wilf Lunn angle to all of that, and a romance to it all, as if these guys, because they literally were, in the case of Shawcraft, they were working out of a building that was a massive shed, and it just seems like it's part of a very particular time and a very particular model of British eccentric that put those things together using various implements, whatever they could do to bash these things together.
Yeah.
Whereas now, obviously, there's entire design departments, production design departments. It's all a lot slicker. It's all a lot more conscious of what it is, and part of an international landscape, I suppose, of networks and production companies that all make content that is just as involved. It's a whole industry, I suppose.
Yeah, I think it's a branding kind of thing, in that, you know, we talked. I mentioned the sink plunger and the egg whisk earlier on. I mean, you know, that's something that if they were to be designing the Daleks now from scratch, if the original design had never, they would never in a million years, obviously, put a sink plunger on there. And so there is, for better or worse, and that's completely a debate for another day, but for better or worse, things are just designed differently now. On the one hand, of course, Ray Cusick, again coming back to Ray, came up with the perfect thing from the point of view of a toy. He wasn't thinking remotely from a toy angle in those days, but the Dalek is the kind of thing that you might design today from scratch, because they would be thinking from a different mentality of, okay, what's going to make a good action figure that we can sell at Christmas, which they weren't doing back then. So it's a completely different dynamic as the way things are thought about now and how they're designed. But that, for me, is what makes those classic Daleks so interesting. The props, because of the fact that on your on the website you talk about these minutiae of details. Of there's a cracked gun box, or there's a chipped slat on the side. And that's what I find so fascinating, because you wouldn't find that almost certainly on the modern series, because they're going to do the remedial work that's required to get them back to scratch. Whereas in those days, and I've just been recently watching Destiny the Daleks on the season 17 Blu-ray box set, and it's, you know, I didn't notice it as a kid, but boy, those Daleks, they are shoddy. But that's part of the charm and the interest to me.
Yeah. And yeah, looking at those things, pointing them out and seeing them, and how they got into that state is the interesting thing.
Yes.
Whereas, as you say, you don't tend to get that in the new series. There is the odd occasional little thing with the new series that's bizarre. That there's the odd occasional with a slat upside down on the new series.
Really?
Yeah, which has helped us to identify things, but that's rare.
Yeah,
very, very rare.
Do you ever come across a fact, John, that you wish you didn't know, that does break a spell for you about either the fiction or the fact?
No, I don't think so. Have
you ever sort of got to the point where you're watching back old episodes now and thinking, I really wish that I hadn't seen that crack in the side of that gun box, because now every time I watch it, I can't stop watching the crack in the side of the gun box?
No, I don't think I'm always able to sort of look past that when I'm watching them anyway. That doesn't. I don't tend to focus in on that unless I need to do it for a specific research. I just sit back and watch it, and it doesn't tend to affect me in that way.
You got that disconnect.
Yes, I can disconnect from it.
And you can even disconnect to the point where you're able to watch the episodes without deliberately looking for little marks.
That's harder. Yeah, I can disconnect, but yeah, there are times when I still find myself falling back into looking for things.
It's always wise, gentlemen, when surfing the net, to take a break just to rest your eyes now and again. We are told, and we're going to do just that right now. Don't you go anywhere though, or you'll miss all of this wonderful information, another deluge of data on all the other conversations happening across the Fandom Podcast Network on all the other shows. So listen to all of this, then meet us back here for more of our Mission to the Unknown here with John.
Thank you for listening. We hope you're enjoying this podcast. We'd like to continue to feed your ears by inviting you to listen to these other great shows on the Fandom Podcast Network. It starts with our flagship show, Culture Clash, discussing the latest in entertainment pop culture. Bloody Kings, Immortals Take Notice, our show covering the entire Highlander universe. Couch Potato Theaters, where we celebrate our favorite movies. Time Warp, the Fandom Flashback podcast discussing a year in movies and our favorite retro movie. and TV pop culture topics. Good Evening, discussing all things Alfred Hitchcock. Union Federation, our Star Trek and Orville show. Hair Metal, the 80s and early 90s rock metal podcast. Type 40, our show covering the time-traveling Doctor Who universe with host Dan Hadley. Lethal Mullet, an 80s and 90s action film podcast with host Adam P. O'Brien. Also check out the Lethal Mullet Network for more great podcasts. What a Piece of Junk, a Star Wars podcast with hosts Scott, Derek, and Nathan. Making Treks, a Star Trek podcast, a deep dive into the final frontier with host Mark Newbold and Adam P. O'Brien. And check out our newest shows, The Fandom Show, our monthly Fandom Podcast Network live YouTube exclusive show about the month's hottest topics in fandom, and the FPN True Believers MCU podcast, discussing the Marvel Cinematic Universe and the related Marvel television and streaming MCU universe, including the connections to the original Marvel comics. You can find the Fandom Podcast Network on several platforms. Please subscribe to the Fandom Podcast Network YouTube channel to receive notifications of new podcast episodes and live events. You can enjoy all of the Fandom Podcast Network audio podcasts on our master feed at fpnet.podbean.com. The Fandom Podcast Network is on all major podcast platforms, including Apple Podcast and iTunes. You can find the Fandom Podcast Network on Facebook. You can email us at fandompodcastnetwork@gmail.com. You can also find the Fandom Podcast Network on Instagram at Fandom Podcast Network and on Twitter at FanPod Network. Thank you for listening, and remember, respect others and enjoy your fandom.
Yes, we've teased and tantalised you there, and we can even clothe you too. There's merch to match all of those shows, including Type 40. If you head over to teepublic.com, search for the Fandom Podcast Network, and there you'll find a store full of all the team colours for all of the podcasts, on everything from T-shirts to phone cases to tapestries and heaven knows what else. Treat yourself, treat your other selves, and it all goes to support the Fandom Podcast Network into the bargain, so everybody wins. Simon and I are still unexterminated and chatting with John here from Dalek 6388 here on Type 40, marking 20 years of this incredible website. John, you you must be just as meticulous with other aspects of your life and other interests as you are with Daleks. Are you? What else is there in your life? Are there any other obsessions that you can confide to us?
Not nowhere near to the extent that I am with Daleks, but I am quite known for being quite fastidious about things. I played darts quite a lot, yeah. And I helped to set up a league, a local league in this area, and I was the secretary of the league for some time, and was always quite known for being quite fastidious about how I ran it, but not to the extent as this. This is the one thing that I do that's sort of I wouldn't have time to do anything else.
Rich, have you got any other websites, other sites concerning darts, or any other interest that you've got, or even Doctor Who sites that you go to that are in your bookmarks that you admire and you think, oh, I could use that idea and sort of bring it into Dalek 6388?
Well, I think we sort of generally pick up things from everywhere, really. You sort of absorb stuff.
Yeah. As the net evolves.
Yeah. And how you should do things better. The videos came along just for seeing other people do videos and think we should jump onto that and do that as well. But
the videos are just superb, and for anybody that hasn't, is diving into sort of Dalek 6388 for the first time, I would say one of the best places to start is with the videos. They are, just fascinating to watch. Again, because of the depth of detail, because of the minutiae that's in there, but they're very well made videos. They feel very professional, very well rounded. They should be on the Blu-ray box sets by now.
Easily broadcast standard, aren't they, these documentaries?
They're really well done, and they're just generally about half an hour of just really interesting geeky stuff, but although they always take me longer than half an hour to watch because I'm forever paused.
Going back, I do that.
Going back over them because there's so literally, it's mind melting the amount of information again that's in there, and it goes through at a good old pace. Is there a video that you're particularly sort of proud of from those that you've done so far, of which there are many?
Yeah, I think the one that I'm most proud of is funny enough, is not so much connected to the Daleks one. It's the stuff about Shepperton.
Yeah.
How they use the locations at Shepperton, because that took a lot of work to get through that.
This is for the 2 Dalek movies.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You were looking at skylines, trees, rooftops.
Yeah,
it was extraordinary. This entire web series is extraordinary. Terry Nation's Army, you call it, don't you? And you launched it in 2019, didn't you? With a weekly run of a block, a whole series, didn't you? And you go back to it now and again and add extra chapters, don't you?
We do, yeah. It was Gav's idea to do it. He'd actually been working on it in the background for a little while before he actually told me that he was doing it. He was making a video. I think it was the Shepperton. He was putting it together from the web page that I'd written up, and he'd been working on it for a little while before he told me. And then he said, "I got this great idea. I think we should do the channel and improve the channel." We'd always had a channel on YouTube, and it had very basic videos on there that I knocked up together some years ago. But he felt that we could, so much of our work is visual.
Yes.
That even now, just going back to what we were talking about, how the internet has changed, people don't like reading so much now. You know, sitting down and reading a website is actually getting quite hard to do now.
Yeah, I've noticed there are a lot more of what we call infographics bring information to life, don't they?
Yeah, and so it seemed the natural way forward to almost remake the website as videos, and people can consume them in a different way, and it's really working. Gav works so hard on them. It
shows.
It's the way his brain works visually. He's very good at putting things together visually and making them look great. And it's really gone down really, really well. I'm really pleased about it.
They are fascinating videos, and one of the things I love about them is you can never tell until you actually start watching the video. You can't tell what it's going to be about. I mean, we're looking at a couple on screen now. You know, what on earth is Centrinians ever going to have to do with Daleks? And as I say, it's not until you actually get into the video. Because the recent one, as I was talking about earlier on the chase, that just talks. The title is all about movie Daleks, the failure of movie Daleks. And I'm like, okay, what is that going to be about? I have no idea. And so again, it's just kind of this rabbit hole idea that you dip into it, and suddenly you've got this whole new thing that I've never looked at the chase, for example, in that much detail before to realise what was going on it, and that then adds to your interest in those stories. To me, it enhances them.
Yeah, well, the thumbnails we do think about for quite a long time. There's necessarily a little bit of clickbaitiness to them. You know, you have to make them stand out. So you have to do that, but it also does. We also try and do it in such a way that people will think, well, what is that to do with the story we're going to tell?
Yes,
and so they do work.
And as I say, I think they work fantastically because they're very, very watchable. And they're, you say that people don't do a lot of reading on the net now as much as video watching, but also, as well as that, there is also this kind of key that you only do any video online now for about 2 or 3 minutes because people will have turned off from watching it. Well, yours is about half an hour, and at no point do you ever.
Never check my phone. I never check how long I've been watching, how long there is to go.
Not in the slightest, and I defy anybody to, because the information that is presented is firstly so interesting, and secondly, it's just presented quite quickly. There is no chance to get bored. is the simple. You don't begin to feel, oh, we're going. We're repeating ourselves now. No. On the contrary, it moves. It has a narrative. It goes from point A to point B via all these different other points, and so it holds the attention. I think that it's a brilliant resource, and I thoroughly enjoy them. And I just hope you keep making them for a long time, because again, it's the geek in you. It's scratching this itch. As I was saying earlier, does it really matter about whether there was a rivet just off center? Well, yeah, it does, and it's fascinating stuff, and I think it just appeals to the geek inside Doctor Who fans. Brilliant. Please keep making them.
Yeah, we certainly do intend to. We certainly intend that's the long-term plan, is to keep on doing it, and because we're really enjoying doing it. It is tough work, and we'd like to get them out more regularly than we do, but obviously real life things get in the way, and Gav's so in demand for his work as well, that he very often has to take long breaks to do work, and that slows things up. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say, do you ever get to the point where you think you might actually have run out of material, run out of ideas, come to a dead end where you sort of feel like you're scraping the bottom of the barrel?
Well, funny enough, I did say that to him the other day. I did say, because we were talking about how long this could go on for, and I said, surely there's going to come a point where we can't say anything else. And
you know everything; it's all out there.
Yeah, but there will be updates to do. There's certain videos we've done, like the Shepperton videos, where there are extra things we found out since those videos have gone up, so we can do newer versions of those and redo
Return to Shepperton.
Yeah, go back there and redo it again. So I don't think, and then of course the new series, we will tackle the new series stuff at some point on there. So we have all that to cover yet. So I think there's quite a lot of material still to come.
It is amazing, isn't it, how Doctor Who just keeps on giving information. Even you mentioned the Andrew Pixley articles previously. His research is obviously second to none, and yet even he still keeps on finding new information or realizing that he's got it wrong or whatever. Doctor Who has just got that to it, hasn't it? And part of that, I think, is because it just wasn't very well documented in the classic years. Well, certainly before JNT took over as producer, it just wasn't particularly well documented.
No, and it's just finding a little memo. Richard Bignell has passed us memos in the past, and just finding one tiny little scrap of information out sort of opens up a whole new world to you of things which happened with that very latest video, the chase video. There was a letter that we saw about the film company borrowing the chase props back, or the movie props back from the TV shows, which we hadn't realized about before, just so they could appear at this fun fair, the Battersea Fun Fair, which we hadn't realized before. We knew they were there, but we didn't realize why they were there.
I mean, what I find fascinating is the depth of information you get in there, because just the photographic research in it alone is incredible. The visual material you find, not just the Daleks necessarily, but again, to go back to that most recent video about the chase, that just the programs from that. You've got a photograph of the program from the Battersea show and all this kind of stuff, and photos of Daleks in Cannes, which I've never seen before. How do you go about finding? You do seem to be unearthing little gems that have never been seen before.
I wondered if it was like the baseball pitch in Field of Dreams: build it and they will come. The people will just appear and bring you all this information.
They do. As I said earlier, we do get a lot of help from other people. Lots of people pass us images which they're happy for us to use. You can get images that they don't want us to use, but they're happy for us to see for research purposes. But yeah, I mean, I trawl the newspaper archives virtually daily. I'm a member of, it must be into 30 or 40, 50 local Facebook groups. If I know a Dalek's appeared somewhere, I'll try and join the local Facebook group and ask about it, and 99 times out of 100, they're very willing for me to do that. I've had the odd one which won't let me in, and they're not interested, but but then you get all sorts of photos from that, which has been brilliant. And funny enough, just in the last week, we've received some cine footage from the 60s.
Oh, wow.
A 60s event, which includes an original Dalek prop.
Wow.
Which will feature in an upcoming video.
Brilliant.
And so was this an event that you knew had taken place and you'd always wanted to see the footage from it? Or was it something that you had no idea had even happened at all?
No idea it even happened. No idea. So it was a complete shock to see it. And it's when the chap emailed us, he said, I've got some cine footage. We expected it to be sort of 10, 15 seconds of something, because that's how it sort of worked in the 60s. You grab a quick
Absolutely.
something and that was it, but it isn't. It's actually a couple of minutes worth, and it's
wow.
It's very, very it's great fun to see it, and Gav's working on a video for it as we speak.
Is there kind of a sort of facts that you can think of that is almost your sort of favourite facts that you managed to find out that either was just particularly interesting or that opened up a whole new avenue for you that had been unlocked before? Is there one sort of thing that you'd point out and say, wow, that really was quite key for whatever reason?
Well, one of the favourite things I think we found out, which did change things to quite a degree, was working out that the Curse of the Daleks props from the 60s stage play.
Yes.
What happened to them? Because for years it was rumoured that the BBC had bought them and they were used in the show, or they'd just been scrapped. But at some point, I think it was me. I might be doing Gav a disservice here, but I think it was me. I discovered something on one of the props which proved that it had been used in the second Doctor Who movie, and at that point that unlocked several different routes we could go down. We knew that the props had appeared in the movie, we knew they'd gone back, and then we knew what props Terry Nation had acquired himself and why he'd got them, because he owned 4 props.
Yes.
Which he loaned out, and it was never really understood how he'd got them. And now once we'd unlocked this fact, we could go forward and backwards through time and work out that he'd actually obtained the Curse of the Daleks props from he bought them, or however he got them, but he got them from there. And I think that was a huge moment for us.
Another piece to the puzzle. When it comes to the website, back to Dalek 6388, when you receive new information or find new things out, or if you just think again and come with the information in a slightly different way, do you decide on a set period of time in each calendar year where you say, okay, we're going to take the website down and we're going to update it all in one, or do you add little bits of information here and there that the average user, the average visitor won't have noticed? Or do you schedule major updates to blow people away with all this wealth of new information that you've discovered?
It's a little bit of both. Most of it is added sort of ad hoc when I'll add things to it as and when we find it out. There are things that we hold back and don't add onto the site until we've made a video on them, because we prefer that the video goes out first before we blow some of the information on the site. Because
it's got that wow factor, hasn't it, being presented in that video form?
But little bits and pieces I add to the site quite regularly. There's going to be a video coming up about the 2 Bernardo's Daleks, the history of those 2 props, and I've managed to find quite a few new appearances that nobody really knew about before, and I haven't added those to the site yet because they're all going to be covered in the video first.
It is fascinating that something like the Bernardo's props are almost sort of mythical in their status as to. And again, this is covered to a small extent, isn't it, in the recent video on the chase? And it is fascinating just to think what happened to those props, where they went. And for anybody that hasn't watched the video, I'm not even going to spoil it for you, because there is some information in there as to what happened to them. And I would, go and watch the video, because it is that in itself is a fascinating story. And I think to an extent, it's those things that we've talked about through the years that we always kind of, Doctor Who fans sort of vaguely knew that, yeah, we think that so at some point some of the props were given to Bernardo's, or were won in competitions and all this kind of stuff. And it's filling in the gaps, isn't it? And that's what I personally find fascinating. It is just filling in the gaps and knowing what happens to those props.
It is, yeah, because that's another little avenue we sort of you have to go down. It's part of the history of all four of the original props. So we had to go down there and sort of down this little hole and find out what happened to them. So we do cover it throughout the 60s, all their sort of appearances and how they physically changed themselves, how they were repainted and what have you. And it's quite a sad story how it ends up in the end.
Yeah.
That they do. I don't want to give it away too much, but really there is no end to it. We don't know whether they still exist somewhere. They may still exist.
Have you sort of been contacted by anybody that worked on the show? Certainly the classic years, I'm thinking, either designers or operators or whatever, that are kind of have discovered the website and have been interested or fascinated or asked questions at all.
Yeah, Mike Tucker has been a good friend to us over the last few years, and I've met him 2 or 3 times since he's been in contact, and he's let us see stuff that sort of behind. There's pictures from the BBC stores and what have you. He's let us see and what have you, which we can't often use, but they do help us to fill in. It helps us to fill in the gaps. Yeah.
Do you know if Ray Cusick ever was aware of the sort of the obsession over the design, in effect?
Not that I'm aware of. I hadn't ever heard that he's ever was aware of it.
I hope he was. I sincerely hope he was.
I would love to have met him. I would love to have met him.
Because it is, the website is a labour of love from the point of from the work that you and Gavin have done on it, but then for the actual detail that is presented, it is a labour of it's love for Daleks, and so and that simply wouldn't exist without obviously both Terry Nation and Ray Cusick, but Ray was definitely alive while you were working on this website in the way that Terry Nation wasn't. So I really hope that Ray was aware of sort of the love out there for his design. Whether he would have liked us calling the video series Terra Nation Army or not, I don't know. but yeah, it would be nice to know that he'd seen it. Do you yourself have a favourite era of Dalek television, or even a favourite story that you point out and say that's where my love of Dalek comes from? Yeah,
Genesis of the Daleks is the story that really got me into Daleks. That was the one point. Although I've got better memories of Destiny of the Daleks, I was a little bit older then.
Yeah.
So my memories could probably come from that, really. But it's really Genesis of the Daleks is my favourite.
So interestingly, what is it about Genesis? Because ironically, Genesis of the Daleks is probably the one Dalek story that features the Daleks the least, actually.
yeah. Well, I think it's the atmosphere of the story. I think it's just the way that it just nails it perfectly. I think it's the second sort of point, really. There was a second chance or should I say, the second go he had at launching the Daleks, really, Terry Nation, and I think that it works better with the second time than it does even the very first Dalek story.
Yeah.
I think the atmosphere it conjures up is just perfect.
And have you got a favourite Dalek prop, or even half a prop, that you think, I'm really fond of Dalek SK45?
And I suppose,
every time it turns up in a photo, you think, oh,
yes, it would probably have to be Dalek 17. And I literally just again this week found.
I was joking, everybody. I was joking.
No, I found a new cutting of Dalek 17 appearing in a parade just this week, not on the newspaper cutting I found this week.
Yeah.
And you get that little a new picture that I've not seen before.
And when was that from? Or can you not tell us because you're going to keep it?
It's from the 1980s. I think it's 90. I need to dig it out again, but I think it was 1980.
Okay.
Which is quite exciting because it comes from a period where that prop wasn't particularly used because it was in such a bad state. It wasn't used in Destiny, the Daleks, and it didn't appear again until the Five Doctors. So there was these few years where it sort of needed refurbishment. So it's quite a rare picture to see it out.
And so, do you have a favourite Dalek designer? Which you talked right at the very top about Dalek livery, about which Dalek do you go for if you're going to have a full-size Dalek? Do you have a favourite Dalek livery?
Yeah, again, that's the genesis of the Dalek style. Yeah, I think that's just perfect. The
gunmetal grey.
Yeah, that military look to it, I think, suits it perfectly. I know a lot of people like the silver of the 60s, but that almost reminds me too much of the 60s. And I think having the gunmetal grey, it just looks a bit more menacing, I think.
Yeah, it does undoubtedly. They look like they mean business with
that tank-like look to
it.
Absolutely. Makes it a bit meaner.
It's an unstoppable tank. It's more aesthetic, isn't it? It is more aesthetic design.
Yeah.
Do you have a least favourite? Is there a least favourite Dalek? I certainly have my least favourite Dalek design. Do you have
I didn't like the new Paradigm Daleks.
Yeah, that's spot on. That's absolutely me as well. They didn't work for you.
They've not got many fans. I stand up. I defend them now and again if I'm feeling so inclined.
I think they wouldn't need too much tweaking. I don't think. I don't think the colours were right.
It's the silhouette for me that doesn't work.
Yeah, the shape doesn't quite work. But there were things they could have done to it to improve it, and they did improve it when they came back in Asylum with the Daleks. They did improve it, although it wasn't actually seen very much. But the colours, I think, if they'd made them more muted, darker colours, maybe the gunmetal colours again, I think they would have looked more more menacing again.
Yeah.
But I think the size of them, coupled with the bright colours, just didn't quite work.
It is funny. No, that's undoubtedly the most divisive Dalek design of all time.
Every time we mention them, wherever we mention them, whether it's on a podcast or a video, we're going to flurry of people who can't wait to tell you how much they hate them. It's without fail.
Yeah. We get it. We get people whenever we put up a post up about the new series that at some point the new Paradigm Daleks will get brought into it.
People don't hate your work. They absolutely love it, John. Is there anything you'd like to take this opportunity to tease people about that's coming up from you guys, either on the site, in video form, or other things that are coming in due course?
Yeah, mainly it will be videos that's coming soon. I would love to be able to finish off the Daleks page. That will come down to what information I can discover. But yeah, we've got a video about the Bernardo's props coming up. And I should point out that we've had a lot of help from Rhys Williams and Stephen Brennan on that video. They've been brilliant. Gav's got several videos in the pipeline. There's the one I mentioned with the cine footage. He's got 5 or 6 videos at various states of completion, I think, that are ready to go. I don't want to give too much away about them, but Dalek's master plan.
You're doing a brilliant job of teasing us. Brilliant.
But also that you have a Patreon page, don't you? So that people who become Patreons get sneak previews of this stuff as well.
They do, yeah, and we obviously love to thank all of them. They've been fantastic. What they do, they chip in with ideas as well and help us along, which is fantastic. We love all that sort of feedback from that. So we can't thank them enough, really.
Awesome. Well, this website of yours, I think that I went through a period, John, where I was taking the Daleks a little bit for granted.
Mm-hmm.
And this was before and slightly after when Doctor Who came back to the television. And your website definitely played a part in reminding me why I loved them so much when I was younger. And adding something somewhere. Obviously, adulthood can deplete our sense of wonder, of childlike wonder at these things, if you let it. And sometimes I find I need to sort of restock on enthusiasm from somewhere, from somehow. And your website has been there for me 2 or 3 or maybe 4 or 5 times over. Can't wait to see how it evolves in the future and how the entire brand, how this family of content and everybody who works on Dalek 6388 and Terry Nation Army. I just say thank you for all that you've done. Happy 20th birthday, and I can't wait to see what's coming.
Thank you so much. That makes me really proud to know that you've all enjoyed it, and it makes the hard work worthwhile.
Well, I'm pleased because I can only echo what Dan has said. I just love it. As I say, in particular, I just love the videos. So, please. And I thought that you had completed all the videos that you were going to complete sort of
so did I.
Or 2 ago. I just assumed that was it. So when you started coming back, was it earlier on this year with new ones? I for one was, jumping for joy. So yeah, as I say, do please keep coming because they're very much enjoyed and very much loved. So yeah, we thank you very much for all of the hard work that you all do on
obviously the links to all of that, they'll be in the show notes of the podcast and the description of our video track too. But tell them, John, where can people find all things Dalek 6388?
Well, obviously our main point of call is the main website, which is dalek6388.co.uk. And then we have links, obviously, from there to the Facebook page, the Twitter page, the YouTube page, Patreon. There's Ko-fi there as well. All the links are there. But if you go onto Twitter and put in Dalek 6388 or Facebook and put that in as well, we usually pop up somewhere. So,
and then of course the YouTube page.
YouTube, of course, the YouTube page. So how could I forget that? Yeah, but again, that's all linked to from the main website anyway. That's can all get there from that.
Fantastic. That's the old girl starting up and calling time on another Type 40 Doctor Who podcast. I'll be back with another one soon enough. Look out for that wherever you found this. It could have been on the dedicated home feed for Type 40 at type40.podbean.com. Could have been on Spotify, Audible, Google Play, Apple Podcasts, iHeart Radio, Stitcher, Podbay, you name it. Oh, so many podcatchers now. I can't remember how many we're on, Simon. You can find us across pretty much anyone that you use. And here on YouTube, of course, on the Spacebook channel too. We're also still on the fabulous Fandom Podcast Network's own master feed. That's filled with so many treats for your ears on the daily. What else? What else is to get ready to? Yes, the Podbean app itself. How could I forget that? So easy to use, even I can use it. And yes, there's here on YouTube, you can just like the video if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and turn on the cloister bell so you get the notifications about what we're dropping next, whether it's another podcast or one of our Type 40 live streams. It's our social media, Instagram and Twitter at Type 40 Doctor Who, or you can join us if you're feeling really brave in real time in the Type 40 Facebook group. Oh, Simon, where can people catch up with you on social media?
I only do Facebook. I'm very quick and easy. So come and have a look at the Lunatics on Facebook. There we go. There's the old mug, just to remind you. So yeah, come and have a look on Facebook for the Lunatics. You'll find me there.
And how about you, John? Are you a social media user? Can people come and interact with you anywhere or with the project on Twitter?
Yeah, probably the Dalek 6388 Twitter account is probably the best place to catch me. Or the Facebook page as well. You can interact with us there as well. Yeah,
absolutely awesome. Well, yes, thanks for your company, John. It's been absolutely fascinating, and a big happy birthday to Dalek 6388.
Thank you. You're welcome. I've really enjoyed it. It's been great.
Type 40. Thanks for joining.
Thank you.
Yeah, and don't forget, yes, let us know what you think of all of this. What you think of John's fabulous website. Let us know in the comments section. What are the little fantastic facts you may have to send John's way? Have you got any questions for John or Gav or anybody else over there? Drop them in the comment section by all means, and we'll pass them on. Or head over to the Dalek 6388 YouTube channel and subscribe there too. But that's it for this time. We always have the time. If you have the space here at Type 40, take care. We'll speak to you again soon. Bye-bye. Bye.